Our planet is trying to tell us something.
We are on a record-breaking warming path. It's expected to get even worse over the next 5 years. It is indeed climate crunch time.
Our planet is trying to tell us something, but we don't seem to be listening. The truth is, global emissions...
But not everyone is turning a deaf ear. Indigenous communities, like the Quinault Indian Nation in Washington State, have always listened to the planet. And now, stand ready to light a path forward.
Many of our ancestors have told of that day of reckoning when it's going to be red nations rising and our people leading the rest of the world. And we are that beacon of light. Many try to extinguish our light, assimilate us, terminate us. But that light is so strong that spiritual strength, knowledge, and wisdom that we have carried for centuries has never left us. We are right there, and we're going to lead the rest of the world through this crisis.
I'm here in Taholah on the Quinault Indian Nation. Today the sea is calm, but the sea is also relentless. It keeps rising.
The community of Taholah faces floods every year, and in 2021, people were evacuated. Plus, there are king tides, the highest tide of the year that pushes water back several streets. So more than 20 years ago, this community began talking about relocation.
So the water was coming in from the river and just coming directly into the village. And it was just kind of coming in through the driveway and then coming in through the rocks. It probably filled up both of these streets here within 2.5, 3.5 hours maybe. And then where we were standing now, we probably got up to, a little over 12 inches.
What makes the Quinault story so powerful is that it's a window into our future. The idea that, like it or not, a changing climate will determine how we live, where we will live, what we will eat, and how much it's going to cost. Quinault is extraordinary in so many ways. The geography ranges from glaciers to oceans on the coast here. This is where the climate changes. Now, every year there are threats from storm surges and king tides. And on the Quinault Nation, that has met a thoughtful, long-term approach to a solution that preserves community and the tribe's values.
There you go. I think high tide's here in about 2 more hours. So you can see the ocean here kind of starting to wave up, but as you look down, you can actually see there's a ton of driftwood sitting up here, and it just keeps accumulating more and more every year. So not only is it on the top of the wall, it's kind of came over the wall.
So for several years now, the Quinault Indian Nation has been in the process of planning a move of the village of Taholah from the mouth of the Quinault River to higher ground. This process started more than 20 years ago, showing the firsthand complexity of how climate change impacts one community.
Tribes have really been at the leading edge of people in this country feeling the impacts of climate change. And of course, tribes have been warning about this for a long time.
And also offering solutions, not just practical mitigation, but big picture action based on age-old understandings of the values of living in balance with the planet.
The World Bank's own research shows that 80% of the world's biodiversity is managed by the indigenous populations, which only make up 5% of the world population. And so 80% is being managed by indigenous people and indigenous knowledge. So if you want to figure out how to best manage biodiversity, how to best manage conservation, you need to turn to Indigenous people and you need to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into the work that you do.
I believe that Indigenous values are the solution to the climate crisis, and I think you see us here in Minnesota, but also all across the country, returning to Indigenous ways of knowing in working to solve the climate crisis.
We're at this place in time where the world is on a trajectory that can't go any further. It's not sustainable. And so we're starting to witness everything collapse around us. We're seeing ecosystems collapse. We're seeing political systems collapse. And as everything around us collapses, those things that we stand on to be true, to be timeless, we are rising.
Rising, yes, particularly in the world of conservation. But how fast? Ocean researcher Barbara Blake takes stock.
Hadala is Atlant is Ashti Gudanai Lagang. Sandra Demert.
My good people, it's an honor to be with you. My mother is Sandra Demert. My father is Ken Johnson. My name is Wafal Girang. My English name or my taxpayer name is Barbara Blake, and I come from Heidelberg, Alaska. As I think about the world of conservation and the world that has been developed over years, you know, this space has not always been a friend to Indigenous communities and has not always really led with the ideals and the perspectives that have been passed on for thousands of years and from our ancestors. And it's definitely taken a while for Indigenous knowledge to be seen, even in the same vein that Western science or scientists today see the world and see the shaping of resources, the shaping of management of those resources. And something that I continuously see in this space is that they're growing in their understanding that these two knowledge systems can walk side by side, that there's not one that is valued more than the other, that our knowledge systems in fact do tell a story of ways of caring for this place.
In Maine, Indigenous stories of caring for the land are getting louder and louder. Traditional Western conservation organizations used to operate independently, often with differing and even conflicting goals. Today, more than 70 of them are united in an embrace of Indigenous leadership from the Wabanaki Commission on Land and Stewardship. A highlight? An ongoing effort to return 31,000 acres to the Penobscot Nation that is both land justice and climate change mitigation. Wabanaki language teacher Gabriel Paul explains that land near Mount Katahdin is essential to the Wabanaki people.
There's no separation, you know, we're part of this, we're both made up of each other, the land and Alnabuk, the native people. And right here, Katadnuk, where we are now, this area holds a lot of Atkukagano, we call them, the stories. And land beneath us, you know, we relate to it. Gigawusin is our mother. And they say the Ewebil, the Giskuk is your father. So no matter where you go, you always have your mom and your dad with you. And that direct connection, this Ktakmik or Ki, the shorter ways, Ki, the land, it's like healing and nourishing, like a mother gives you. She nourishes, she grows, she provides for the people, you know. So when we say Mizialogumuk or Mizitadolnabemuk, and that means all your relations. Indigenous people, the Skijinawuk or Alnabuk, we have relatives everywhere. It's not just talking about people, you're talking about everything we're connected to. What some people would think is just an object or a thing, but you know, Gatchagidanagic, they're the really ancient ones, you know, the old ones that have a life, and you know, they exist just as we are.
it cuts to the heart of what Penobscot Nation, Penobscot culture and community is about. And so I think, you connect those lands to our current holdings, and then the Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument, right? It creates this corridor of management, of caretaking that we as Indigenous people really holds out the hope for the entire planet. The whole set of issues we need to respond to, rapid climate change, biodiversity loss, all of those sort of fundamental problems. I'm a scholar, so for me, it's like the scholarship is actually supporting this. It's saying when Indigenous people are at the forefront, are in the leadership, our governance is mobilized, that's actually producing the most profound conservation outcomes around the world. And it's also creating opportunities in places where places are more climate resilient. We're able to adapt to the changing climate, as well as offer the frameworks for mitigation. Indigenous leadership and knowledge systems are fundamental to the future of humanity on this planet. I know I'm not the only person who believes that.
Listen to the words from Biden administration's Interior Secretary, Deb Haaland.
My ancestors lived sustainably in the Southwest and survived famine and drought with the understanding that future generations would rely on their hard work and sacrifices. I can't help but think about the environmental tragedies that might have been avoided, like the Dust Bowl, the extinction of the passenger pigeon, and the growth of extreme wildfires across the West if the federal government had consulted with and respected the practices of stewarding the earth that Indigenous people developed over millennia.
Back in Quinault, there are immediate concerns. The next flood is only a storm away, and the homes that survive the last ones are sometimes infected with black mold and other health concerns. The new village is about a half-mile away on higher ground. The Quinault Nation has built most of the infrastructure, streets, housing plats, sewage.
So what you can see here is the development of our first phase. But as far as building the houses, that's still a whole nother phase to go. So I know we were talking about.
And reflecting the nation's priorities, the Generations House, the first building, is a center for elders and children.
This was our most modern effort to relocate our most vital citizens with all of our next generations.
There are still many questions to be answered. What happens to an elder who has worked their whole life and paid off their mortgage, but because they live in a flood zone, they have to start all over again? How does that work? And who pays for all of this? The Quinault Nation has not figured out yet where more than $450 million will come from.
We recently just did win an award for, I think, $1.9 million from HUD, and that was to construct 6 senior units. So that's going to be our first go.
And here's the thing. The Quinault Indian Nation is further along in this sort of planning than nearly every community on the planet. Few, and certainly not federal or state agencies, are putting time and resources into planning their move to higher ground. When we drove up the coast to get to Taholah, we passed through low elevation towns and even cities and observed firsthand the scale of the problem. It's clear that we are just beginning to see how expensive adapting to the climate will be. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has awarded $25 million for 3 communities working on their move to higher ground. In addition to Quinault, 2 villages in Alaska, Newtok and the native village of Nupakiak, top the list. And back to Quinault. A second village, Queets, is also in the early stages of a relocation plan. The takeaway here is the scale of what's required across the globe to move people away from danger.
I had the chance to visit Quinault a year ago, and they are doing just amazing work on climate relocation and climate resilience. We provided funding to Quinault almost 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago. It's one of 3 communities that are going to serve as kind of pilot projects on community-driven relocation. I was really impressed by the foresight in their planning. You know, we shouldn't be surprised that when tribes have resources, they're able to do very impressive things. Not only are they taking the lead here in the United States, they are really serving as leaders in this effort for the world. There aren't a lot of places that are really engaged in this sort of activity right now.
So every one of these houses is full of brackish water underneath them, causing a bunch of mold problems. Walls are being replaced.
But what the tribe is doing at Quinault, what they're doing at Nupakiak and Newtok in Alaska, is they're really on the leading edge of things that we're going to have to think harder about across the globe.
The biggest question may be the scale of what's involved. So many places across the planet where people have lived for generations may no longer be habitable.
There are tribes that are facing impacts from climate change that aren't necessarily going to require them to move entire communities, but they're going to have to spend a lot of money making their communities more resilient, whether it's drought or wildfire, or changing ecosystems that change the foods that they eat, or just more severe weather. It's not just relocation, which is expensive enough, but it's also that resilience piece of it.
A report by the Natural Resources Defense Council, the NRDC, looked at the risk of flooding and concluded that more communities are in danger. The data was collected from the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
The scale of what we all need to be planning for and thinking about is massive. It is a bigger and more communal problem than many of us have ever thought about before in our lifetimes or for generations. And so even in communities that have put so much thought and effort and planning into relocation, you can still see how hard it is. Most of the data that we have are from non-tribal communities because those are the places that are more likely to have federally backed flood insurance through FEMA, which is where a lot of our data comes from. And looking at those data sets from FEMA, we see that before getting any kind of help to reduce the risk to your repeatedly flooded home, you might flood 3, 4, 5, 10 times before any assistance is available.
And part of the problem is that even after a flood, communities will rebuild using zoning rules that have been around for decades, even though the world is changing.
The actual risk is changing because of climate change, development patterns, erosion. A place that didn't flood a generation ago might be flooding regularly now. It might be flooding every time there's a high tide. Another reason why areas that have previously been considered low risk are now at higher risk is because our understanding of that risk is just out of date. In a lot of places around the country, FEMA's flood risk maps, which form the basis for our floodplain management decisions, are 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years out of date.
How do communities figure this out? Do we move now? A few years from now? poor after a flood.
It just depends on the particular needs and priorities of an individual community. So that's one component, is flexibility. You can't use a cookie cutter program that is going to do the same thing for the lots and lots of different communities who are facing different kinds of risks, who have different cultures, different histories. Another thing is who's involved in the planning, who's at the table, who gets to make the decisions about when we move, where we move, what the community we move to will look like. These are all questions that communities dealing with the fact of relocation are grappling with.
I was really impressed that they are thinking at Quinault very strategically about how to address these questions. And a lot of the people that I spoke with in the community are being very thoughtful about that, along with community members in places like Newtok and Napakiak. You know, they're not only thinking about themselves and the equity they've built in their own homes, they're thinking about their kids and their grandkids and the community that they're going to live in future generations. And, you know, this is just another example of when we make investments in tribes and we partner with them and make sure that we're supporting them as leaders on these types of issues, that tribal people come up with really innovative solutions.
The climate story is as much about values as it is a changing planet. It's easy to see the connection between the Quinault people and their place in this world.
We're fishing people here. You know, we lived off the land, ocean, river ecosystems. Our villages were seasonal. We would move as the land changed or as the weather changed or as our needs arose. And until we kind of adopt this kind of new mindset and think about how we could best set up future generations for success, going to take a total value reset from society. And I think what you're seeing happen in all sectors, even from a science perspective, Indigenous values and teachings are finally getting centered and put in that limelight, because that paradigm shift the rest of society has to do. Indigenous and Native people are already doing that. And this common teaching that we're borrowing, you know, this earth and this land, this reality from future generations. You know, we all have a sacred duty to leave the world better than we found it. You know, that's universal. Any climate policy initiative will fail or be fundamentally flawed without Native people at the table in a meaningful way. You know, this whole transition to, you know, a green energy framework or a green energy grid, you know, for us, you know, some in Indian country have started calling it green colonialism, because these projects, which sound good, you know, big hydrogen hubs or offshore wind, they have significant impacts to the environment, and just the scale, the footprint, the impacts to water, to air, all of that, there's a cost. And a lot of times it's right on top of a sacred site, or it's right on top of a very significant area of cultural interest, or will significantly impact a Native way of life. Unless we are at the table to give that perspective and be able to have decision-making authority, you know, these projects are always going to be flawed.
On the Quinault Nation, tribal citizens take the long view, even though this is a community where the impact of climate change is now.
Our identity and existence is indivisible from the land and territory that we steward, and the blueback being the center to that. You know, they're a keystone species. You know, so many other species, plant life, ecosystems would collapse if that species was allowed to be wiped off the face of the earth. And we don't see a future of our nation if that stock and that salmon species isn't protected and thriving.
And Quinault leaders know the best route forward for managing climate challenges is listening to and working with tribal governments.
There's an entire world of opportunity where others fail to lead, fail to act, fail to respond to traditional and ancient values that are proven through centuries. as others are collapsing around us, we're rising. And everybody knows at some level, Indigenous people hold such power, resilience, knowledge, and wisdom. But when we're able to do that in a way to lead the rest of the world out of this crisis, that's the opportunity that we see.
If we're going to truly move the paradigm forward and shift our ways of thinking and acting in the face of climate change, it's going to happen best when tribes have the most authority, autonomy, and self-governance over those decisions and affairs.
I wish I could recall which elder said this quote, but it has been emblazoned in my mind. And they said that indigenous knowledge is no longer the backup plan. It is the plan. And I really do believe that the survival of our Earth in a healthy way, the survival of us as people, is really dependent upon restoration of those indigenous values and taking a more holistic approach and kinder approach with each other.